Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
Today we have a special treat for you. We have with us a longtime friend of the show, Representative Beryl Amedee is joining us today to give us some insight into the special session that we're heading into now. And the special session's primary focus will be the state budget and taxes. Before we get into that, let me read the scripture of the day. It is Psalm 107, verses 10 through 16. And it says, "Some of us once sat in darkness, living in the shadows of death. We were prisoners to our pain, chained to our regrets, for we rebelled against God's word and rejected the wise counsel of God Most High. So he humbled us through our circumstances, watching us as we stumbled, with no one there to pick us back up. Our own pain became our punishment. Then we cried out, 'Lord, help us, rescue us.' And he did. His light broke through the darkness, and he led us out in freedom from death's dark shadow and snapped every one of our chains. So lift your hands and give thanks to God for his marvelous kindness and for his miracles of mercy for those he loves. For he smashed through heavy prison doors and shattered the steel bars that held us back just to set us free." And I love that scripture because right now, I think this is where we are in America. I really do. I think that we have been just held back. And the Lord is breaking us out of the prison that we have been in. And it's only because of God's grace and mercy, his kindness and love, that we are in the moment where we're going to experience freedom that we've never had before. And I think it's a time to be in a posture of great thanksgiving and worship.
You know, Danielle, and it's only God. Here we are, election day, November 5th, 2024, so much on the line, really, for our country. This is not just an ordinary election. This is a country and an election whose results really will determine, in my view, whether the republic survives. And I do believe that the Holy Spirit is breaking the chains. I believe that he has woken so many Americans up, and I'm expecting good results across the board with God's grace. So people have been in chains, Danielle. They really have, and they felt chained by this oppressive administration that we've been dealing with for the past 4 years, and hopeless at times. But today is a new dawn, and I'm believing for the best and praying for the best as well. As you mentioned a minute ago, Representative Beryl Amedee, who's been on our show several times, a great Louisiana legislator, here to talk to us a little bit about this special session on the budget, on revenue, on taxes that will be coming up on tomorrow, on November 6th. So we are happy to have you, Beryl, once again. We look forward to hearing from your insights. How are you today?
Incredible, and thank you for that opening scripture. That's it's very fitting. And while I'm expecting fantastic results, I like to remind people that whatever you see happening, just hold fast, hang on, take a breath, be patient, because God sees all of it, and he has a plan, and his plan is for our good. So no matter what you're seeing and hearing, if it doesn't look right to you, just stand firm, hold onto your faith, and we will see his hand move. And we're looking forward to beginning the special session on Wednesday, if for no other reason than that we've been preparing for it for over a month. So it's almost like, can we just get started? And so on Friday, the first of the bills began to show up on the legislature's website, so we could finally see the actual bills. What we've had as legislators for weeks now are drafts of bills, and that's fine. But when you're dealing with a draft, you know that it can still change. It's not the final product. And also, we were finally able to get a fiscal analysis of most of the bills in the last 2 weeks. A fiscal analysis, though, is not the same as an actual fiscal note on the official bill. So right now, if anyone wants to preview the bills, they're being posted. We were up to 12 last time I checked, and that list could grow a little bit more. And each of the bills has a section at the end called a digest. So what I recommend, especially because some of these bills are pretty lengthy, like over 100 pages, is that people can go to the website, click on the text of the bill, but scroll to the end and look at the digest first, and then go back and look at the bill. And then after you see whether you understand it, you can go back to the digest again with a broader understanding of what's in each bill. And pretty soon we should have fiscal notes posted there too. Last I checked, we didn't see any yet, but these things are rolling out now as we speak.
Yeah. And it's all important. Before we get into the details of it, Beryl, the timing of the beginning of this session. I mean, we obviously may not know the results of the presidential election. We may not even know the results of certain congressional elections or other races for the next several days, maybe even week or 2 weeks. Is there a particular reason why the governor wanted to start this special session that's so critical and so important, the day after, these elections?
Well, in the early days of talk of this special session happening, we were given sort of a hold the date messages. And it seemed that every 3 days, those dates were changing. So we had to mark the calendar and remark it. And early on, he actually planned to call us in before Election Day. But then it got complicated because if you are a legislator who lives near Baton Rouge, on Election Day, you could go vote and still be at the Capitol. If you live a little ways out, like for me, it's a 90-minute drive, not counting traffic, I could go home the night before, vote in the morning, and then be back at the Capitol in a reasonable number of hours. But if someone lives farther, maybe in the Monroe and Shreveport area, that's quite a drive. And so it was decided that we could come in on the Monday, gavel in, get the bills moving, and go home, and everybody vote on Tuesday and come back on Wednesday. Once again, when people live very far from the Capitol, it's just not practical. So most of us early voted anyway, because we didn't want to take any chances. And when the dates were finally officially announced, the special session begins on Wednesdays. As you said, we might come to the Capitol on Wednesday morning still not knowing the outcome of many of the important races. But we couldn't push the beginning of the session off too long because we need to complete the session before Thanksgiving in order that any constitutional amendments that pass can be processed in time to make it onto a ballot in March. And that way, those items that are on the ballot will be voted on by all of the voters in Louisiana before we come into our regular session in April. So that's what's behind all the timing. And that's why it might seem odd, but there's a reason. How do they say it? There's a method to the madness.
Yeah.
And Beryl, it seems like Governor Landry found a way to get the constitutional constraints on the budget matters addressed this year. After all, of course, early on in the year, we heard rumors of a constitutional convention that never really was able to come together. But what do you expect to get tackled on the budget management issues and the tax code in this session?
The main item that the governor is hoping passes to go to the voters in March is a rewrite of Article 7 of the Constitution. While several articles actually affect the way the budget is done in Louisiana, Article 7 is the main one. It has the most effect on the budget. So by changing certain aspects of Article 7, we hope that we can unlock a lot of what's been locked up in the budget for a long time. If we never change the way that we arrange the budget and the way that we create the budget in Louisiana, then we'll have the same problems we've had for a long time. Whenever we're faced with a potential deficit or a projected deficit, the legislature is pretty much hamstrung because there's only so much we can do. There's only so much change we can affect to the budget. The legislature really only gets to deal with the state general fund itself. And that would be like you suddenly have a shortfall, a deficit in your household budget, but you're only allowed to resolve that deficit just by what's in your checking account. You can't touch your savings, you can't touch retirement, you can't touch investments, you can't touch anything else except what's literally in your checking account. So this is one of the changes that would happen with the passage of Article 7, some of the other bills. When we unlock some of the constitutionally protected funds, it allows the legislature to have more flexibility in moving money around. As you know, we have many, many dedicated funds. I've forgotten total count, hundreds of dedicated funds in the state budget. And a lot of those dedications were created many years ago. So when you review them, you can see pretty quickly that sometimes what may have been a priority in, pick a year, 1995, might not really be a budget priority in 2024. So it is a good idea to review those funds. It is a good idea, in my opinion, to unlock many of them, probably most of them. I don't know if we can go to all of them, but we really have to make some changes. We can't continue to do the state budget for years to come with so much of it locked down. And I know that
Yeah,
it's locked down over the years, mainly because of distrust of the legislature. So this isn't by accident.
right.
Oftentimes,
Beryl, are there any, not to interrupt you, but are there any particular dedicated funds that have been locked up in the Constitution, unable to move, that that come to your mind?
there are so many. I wouldn't want to single any particular one out right now. There
Yeah,
are there are so many funds that I'm trying to think of some. I don't want to name any particular ones right now because
yeah,
when you pick, it's going to be controversial to somebody.
right.
So I'm hoping for a robust review of all of them.
Yeah, and this would give you an amendment of Article 7 would give you an opportunity to look at all of it and make a determination about whether or not these funds that are currently dedicated should remain dedicated funds.
Right, and some of that can be done with the rewrite of Article 7, which I don't have a simple review in front of me right now. And other bills that are going to be brought this session, some that are already filed, deal specifically with funds, certain funds, types of funds. And so there are so many intricate parts. Some people have called the governor's tax reform package a jigsaw puzzle because there are many parts and they do all interconnect, they all work together. And so I think the main work of this session is going to be polishing those parts. How much can we find 2/3 agreement on and how much needs a little more work? Because most of these bills are going to have 2/3 of the House and the Senate in order to pass. As you
Yeah,
know, budget bills and constitutional amendments, these most of these bills have that high bar that they're going to have to reach, and so all of the bills are going to have to be polished. I'm expecting to have healthy debate and discussion. Most legislators that are digging in, looking and studying these bills, are formulating their list and their opinions right now. And that's what I'm doing is reviewing the list, not only of special funds, dedicated funds at the constitutional level and the statutory level, but also all of the other proposals, because we have many proposals to do things like broaden the tax base. As you know, when you broaden the base of what is taxed, it means that the rate can go lower. When you streamline that base and make it very specific, the tax rate has to go higher. And so there are a lot of proposals here to imitate what many other states do as far as what do we tax and what do we not tax. And so we're going to be combing through these bills and deciding what can we live with, what do we not like, and what do we love. And
yeah,
virtually every item is going to be controversial to somebody.
yeah. When you say broaden the tax base, Beryl, obviously that means that there will be more demographics, more people, more groups paying taxes that perhaps are not paying taxes now, which certainly will be controversial because, the people who are currently not paying taxes, they don't want to have to start paying taxes. But how do you broaden the tax base without including more people in it and without requiring more of the population of Louisiana to be paying taxes?
Right. I'm not sure how you do that. But at the same time, with a broadening of the base, if it allows for a lowering of the rate, the tax rate, then overall, we should all be paying less taxes. And that will also put Louisiana at in a more competitive position among other states, which should in turn increase things here that are good for Louisiana. Like our businesses should be able to thrive more. There should be more business coming to Louisiana, creating more good jobs. So there will be more people able to work and less people who are having to be dependent upon the government. So all in all, it's a good idea. It's a good plan. The goal being initially to reduce the state income tax to a flat 3%. This is individual income tax. And in the future, a few years down the road, continue to lower that until we have zero individual income tax. And another part of the plan,
Yeah. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say another part of the plan lowers the corporate tax rate. And that is part of what makes Louisiana competitive when businesses want to come here. But, a lot of times businesses don't stay away from Louisiana because of our tax rate. They stay away because of our tax complications. Our our whole way we do taxes in Louisiana is so extremely complicated compared to other states that there are some big businesses that would want to come to Louisiana, but they've stayed away. They've had to hire extra analysts just to decide whether it would be beneficial to them or not. When they're looking at which states to go to, like one CPA or one analyst can tell them whether this state would be beneficial or that state. But if they've got to hire 3 or 4 just to look at Louisiana, a lot of times they're just not even going to look at Louisiana. So we're trying to uncomplicate the way that we do taxes in Louisiana. One of the things you may have heard over the recent years, is to have a single provider or a single collector, I should say, for sales tax. Right now in Louisiana, we have a state sales tax, but every parish sets their own rate of sales tax and every parish collects it on their own. We, a few years ago, were one of only 2 states that still did that. All the rest of the states had gone to a central collector sort of system. And I believe the Supreme Court even ruled that the way Louisiana was doing things was not acceptable. And so we do have the ability for businesses to go just to the Louisiana Department of Revenue website and deal with sales taxes there. One-stop shop. It handles the state and the parish. But in order for someone who is on the ground to figure out how much they need to charge, they would have to know in every parish that they deal with, what is the rate. And so another proposal for this session is a bill that would expand taxes or sales taxes to services. And in Louisiana, that sounds like a foreign idea, but there are many other states that do tax services. And so the bill right now contains a lengthy list of potential taxable services that has been gleaned from other states. So we would not be an outlier. But here in Louisiana, one of the things the legislature is going to have to decide this month is which services, what kinds of services are we talking about? And so if you're going to do dog groomers, do you do nail salons? If you do nail salons, do you do hair salons? If you're doing personal services like that, what about tattoo parlors? What about ear piercing or body piercing? And then we were talking about services in general. What other kinds of services? What about plumbing repairs when you call a plumber to your house? What about air conditioning repairs? And if we're only talking about repairs, do you also want to tax new construction? And at what point does this become negative on the economy instead of a positive? And while we're
It
talking,
feels negative.
anytime
Yeah, it
more,
feels very negative.
yes.
Yeah, do you have any idea and you may not know right off, not trying to. Do you know whether or not states like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and other states that appear to have thriving economies and have entirely reduced the state or eliminated the state income tax, do you know whether or not they have the kind of tax that you just described, tax on services?
I haven't memorized the list of which states do tax services, but I know that there are many. I also know that states that don't have an income tax usually have a high property tax. And so the initial reaction and conversations with the public about increasing a property tax is how unfair that is because only property owners pay property tax. But I always have to point out that everybody actually pays property tax because the property owner has to pay it directly, but the person who rents or leases has to pay it indirectly through the amount of the rent or the lease that they pay to the property owner. So the argument about property taxes only being paid by owners is not really true. Everyone
Because they're
pays,
passing it down.
yes, you can pay it directly or indirectly. Then there's the argument about sales tax. If we're going to broaden the base, sales tax compared to income tax. Let's think about this. One thought that comes to me all the time as my initial thought is the general rule. When the government taxes something, it gets smaller. When the government subsidizes something, it gets bigger. And so why are we taxing income to begin with? Because we're taxing the productivity of people, which is something we actually want to inspire and encourage. So when you compare an income tax with a sales tax, then you begin to consider that an income tax is not good in that your income is what helps you to be able to be independent and take care of all of your needs. Whereas a sales tax is only charged when you actually buy something. And so if we have both an income tax and a sales tax, then your money is taxed coming to you and your money is taxed when it goes away. So it feels like every time money moves, it's being taxed. So that seems like a double tax. So if we're going to tax point of sale, you get to determine how much you're going to spend. You get to determine if you're going to buy an economy car or a luxury car. You pick and choose. That's based on your own budget. You get to determine whether you're going to buy, name brand clothes or secondhand clothes. So you have options when we're dealing with sales tax. With income tax, you really don't. They'll take it out of your paycheck.
No,
Well,
absolutely.
and people are making choices, right? People are just not working, or people are getting paid under the table. And so that causes its own set of problems, which we're feeling the knock-on effects of right now as a society. Is there any hope, Beryl, that there would be a slash to the income tax completely during this session? We haven't seen anything like that filed. It seems like they're looking at more a reduction and then like a multi-step process instead of taking it away all at once.
It's funny you should ask that. I'm actually working on a draft that would bring income tax to zero. And when I'm finished with it, I may go ahead and file it. But I have to be honest with you, I don't expect that it could pass this session because the majority of legislators are going to look at it. And unless I can put into this bill some way to make it close to what we call revenue neutral, I don't think it'll stand a chance of passing right now. And so I don't believe that bills must be revenue neutral to pass. Revenue neutral means if you're going to give people a break on their income tax, well, we can't let that cause a deficit in the state budget. So we're going to have to increase what we collect from some other source to offset it.
It's a false premise. Yeah. Why can't we cut services? Let's have the government focus on what the government is supposed to do. Roads, bridges, which they haven't been doing well, but I think they're doing better under Joe Donahue. Although if he's listening, I would really like his attention to turn to the Berg Bridge. I know you would too as well. Beryl, your church is on the other side of that bridge.
Yes.
focus on the National Guard, focus on, being able to improve the state of education, although, I think that should be as local as possible. But look, I have gotten even more and more radical in my views of what a conservative government, what a government should actually look like. I think we basically could blow up LDH. I think we could blow up a lot of agencies and just, let people work and have health insurance. And I don't know. I'm sorry, you're catching me at a very inflamed point in time.
Well, a big election that's gone on has had something to do with inflaming most of us. But yes, I agree. And I tried not to be too excited when you talk about blowing up LDH, because I wouldn't want anybody to think we're literally going to blow up LDH.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I was listening. When
Beryl, what about the what about speaking of the national election? You have Elon Musk, you have Vivek Ramaswamy, and others who are talking a lot about cutting bureaucracy, cutting spending, addressing the bloated federal government that we have and downsizing it significantly. Whenever I see legislators or the governor talk about, reforming our tax system and our revenue system in Louisiana, nobody ever talks about cutting spending. Nobody ever talks about finding ways to reduce the amount of taxpayer money that's being spent and squandered across, multiple agencies in the state of Louisiana. It never comes up. Why do you think it is that nobody ever wants to? Because that has to be a part of reforming our economy. That has to be a part of creating a more business-friendly environment. But nobody ever wants to they never seem to want to talk about ways to reduce spending.
So I agree. I believe that the reason that we don't hear much of that is because it's just, I don't know, rare people, patriots perhaps, who understand and try and live by the idea that the greater the government, the smaller the freedom. The smaller the government, the greater the freedom. At the federal level, there are different challenges, and we've spent so many years now where the federal government is just pretty much dysfunctional. I'll just put those aside for a moment and talk about the state, because that's where I work. At the state level, I believe we could stand to do a whole lot of streamlining also. There are many things that even at the state level, the government provides that I believe are beyond the Constitution. It's beyond what our founding fathers for this nation ever intended, even for state government to take care of.
Yeah.
I look at many things in the state budget and wonder, why do we even fund that? And Danielle, I think you used the word radical a moment ago. Well, here's one radical idea. Yes, the Berg Bridge is a problem. Why in the world did they ever say it was going to take 3 years, and now we're already past 3 years and it's still not done? Very frustrating. But the reality is, if we're really going to talk about streamlining government and letting it only operate under the authority that it's supposed to have, roads may not be something the government is actually supposed to use our tax dollars to do. Someone challenged me a few years ago, a friend, who said, why do our taxes even pay for roads? And I said, well, if we don't do that, then how will there be roads? And they said, the free market. Any of the roads that exist today only exist because they were originally farm to market roads. When a company wants to get its product to the customers, the company will do what it has to. Now, maybe we can set standards for roads for safety, because, the founding fathers didn't live in a time when they had to deal with automobiles, maybe runaway horses. But I just wanted to throw that out there to get people thinking of all of the things that our tax dollars are used for. How many of those things are legitimate uses for civil government, legitimate uses for our tax dollars, based on what the founding fathers envisioned, which was actually based on what they saw in Scripture?
Yeah.
I think it's
well,
fun.
I agree with you, Beryl. I 100% agree with you. I do think that the government's role is to create the conditions for the market to work, which it has not been doing. And maybe that needs to get rectified in order for companies to want to build roads, because right now companies don't even want to come here. So if they don't want to come here and we don't have, I mean, not saying that this would happen overnight, but then, we are the bridge to nowhere at that point.
Yes. And so, this idea is a very fun philosophical idea, but it's about as popular in real life right now as solving coastal erosion by knocking the levees off the Mississippi River. It's where we are.
Yeah.
It's not going to
Yeah.
happen, not anytime soon.
And Beryl, one thing that really gets my goat is, why won't the legislators look at this? Why won't they look at cutting spending? Because the people who vote for conservative legislators are taxpayers.
Yeah.
So their base wants this done.
Sure.
It's the people that they're that are getting the services, by and large, are not voting for conservatives.
Yep. And
Sorry.
the conservatives are not getting what they voted for.
Correct.
I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. Get to shopping, that helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at Danielle@freedomstate.us for more information.
No, I would say right now, Beryl, 9 out of 10 Louisiana citizens, if you ask them about it, are thrilled about the idea of eliminating entirely the personal income tax, not just reducing it. I wasn't aware of your proposed legislation or potential legislation to phase it out, which
Heard it
is
here first.
certainly, heard it here first, which is certainly a viable alternative. But I would say that the idea of eliminating the personal income tax in Louisiana is extraordinarily popular. Doing that now, obviously that, as you said, that could involve raising taxes in other areas and that sort of thing. But and people say, well, look at Texas, they have a high property tax, they don't have any personal income tax. But if that's the case, why is the economy in Texas booming and thriving and our economy is stagnating here? They're obviously doing something right. And I would imagine that the elimination of the individual personal income tax in Texas probably has a lot to do with it.
Sure that by itself has a whole lot to do with it. I mean, it's a good idea, but I really believe, honestly, the reason that business is thriving in Texas has much more to do with regulation compared to, or the lack of regulation compared to Louisiana. Right now, just phone calls to me as a legislator, to my office, and emails dealing with, I'm trying to explain some of these scenarios without revealing anything too personal. There's a family who wants to add a bedroom onto their house so that the grandparents, who are getting on in years, can move in. The original plan was to add the bedroom with a little bathroom and a kitchenette. Well, right now they're fighting with the Board of Health, who won't sign off on that unless they increase the size of their sewer treatment plant. And so they said, well, what if we remove the bathroom? And they said, no, same problem. And they said, well, what if we remove the kitchenette and just have a standalone bedroom? And they said, no, same problem. And it's like, we're not affecting the sewer if we're not adding, more toilets, more sinks. So it seems that they're just gauging the need for an increased sewer treatment plant based on the number of people who are going to live in the house. The sewer treatment they have right now can certainly take on 2 more people. It's for a whole family. Anyway, that's just one of the irritations. The answer so many times, people who are trying to do something residential or literally commercial, and they're struggling because of certain features of the permitting process, certain requirements. we have another business nearby that wants to close in their ditch in front of their business so that they can broaden the driveway so that customers can come and go more safely. Well, right now, the DOTD is saying you can't get a permit for that unless you build a retention pond to capture your runoff, which is odd because this particular business drains away from the road as it is. So government
Yeah.
regulations are sometimes just unreasonable.
And I think, Beryl, that's so right. It's interesting that you mentioned this because one of the candidates for the mayor of Baton Rouge, central part of his platform is to radically decrease the regulatory bureaucratic burdens on the permitting process, because so much of it is so unnecessary. And the two examples that you just gave are just textbook examples of a government that really does not have its finger on the pulse of the citizens and the burdens that they face in trying to be prosperous and trying to start businesses. Do you know whether or not in this particular session, I don't think it covers it, there is any legislation that would serve to reduce the type of regulatory burdens on people who are trying to start businesses that you're talking about?
I don't see an item that addresses that specifically. If there is some way we could draft a bill to tie it somehow to tax reform directly in a way that fits with any call item, then we could. But at the same time, the session begins in honestly a matter of hours. So to draft something that might be complicated is running short. So it's better if we work on that and bring it in the regular session, which again, in 2025, the regular session is going to be what's called a fiscal only session. So if it's not directly tied fiscally to the budget, then it will be have to be one of the 5 bill limit for any legislator that carries it. But coming back to the earlier question about why is nobody talking about reducing government or cutting? I've had that conversation with the governor twice so far recently and with his staff multiple times. And it seems that his main focus right now is really to get the things done that he needs done before we go into session in April, especially the items that would have to go on the ballot in March, deadlines. Governor in Louisiana, under the law, the governor proposes the budget and he has to present his proposal to appropriations in the month of January. And it does seem that he has, within his authority as governor, the ability to make reductions on his own or by executive order to order reductions coming from the departments if he wants to. But that has not been his focus. Instead, what he's telling us, the legislators who keep harping on cutting government, he says, you can cut to your heart's content. Just bring it in April. Any cuts you want to make, bring it in April. And so it's been frustrating to us because there are a number of us who really want to see the cuts before we vote on some of these bills. Because honestly, I've got a little list of the dollar amounts tied to some of these proposals, and I'll read a few to you in a second. But when I'm looking at these proposals, it seems to me that if these pass, we should not only solve for the deficit, we should have an excess. We should have surplus money coming in, which tells me, why do I need to broaden the base that far if this little bit of work would bring in sufficient funding? So I just wanted to give you some examples. We were talking about the state individual income tax. Right now, we have 3 different levels of state income tax. And the proposal that we're handling this session would be to reduce that to 3% across the board. Well, it'll be a reduction for some people. Right now, the lowest tax bracket is only taxed at 1.85%. So for them, it would be an increase, but at the same time, the governor wants to set the mark for how much money you can make before you even are taxed. So right now, for every half a point of individual income tax, the state brings in $500 million. So if we reduce the state income tax by 1 whole point, that would mean $1 billion. So half a point, half a billion. So if you want to play with math, there you go. Corporate tax, with the bills proposed, we're trying to lower that and level it at 3.5%. Every half a point in corporate income tax, that's $200 million to the state budget. And then the 0.45 sales tax that's currently scheduled to roll off July 1st of 2025, that's valued at $480 million per year. So half a point of sales tax right now is about half a billion. So $500 million for a half point of sales tax. So that gives you some ideas of what we're working with. So if I wanted to bring a bill right now that would cut the state income tax to zero, for it to stand any chance of passing, I would have to multiply the rate of what comes in. For every half of a point, that's $500 million. So for every point, that's $1 billion. So right now, if we're going from 4.5% of individual income tax, multiply that, and you'll see how much money we would have to find somewhere else if we want it to be revenue neutral.
And Beryl,
I'm happy to.
I bring this up because I know that you get this because you alluded to it earlier, but that's also funny math. Because if you're incentivizing people to do business, if you're incentivizing people to move to the state, then there's more people. So it's not a static number. It's not a zero-sum game of this $500 million. And it incenses me that the legislature and the governor would look at us and say, you have to pay more because we are moving the money around. I don't frankly have time for our money to be moved around. I want them to do what's right. I want us to see a balanced budget. I want us to see a smaller government. I want us to see more people coming back, more people staying in the state. It's just so enraging. And, know that I'm not hollering this at you because I know I'm preaching to the choir. Have you talked to Paul Hurd, the attorney out of Monroe, who's got a whole package of bills? He's calling the golden, I can't remember the name of it, but his website is louisianaxl.org. Have you
The
looked
gold
at that?
standard, the gold
The gold
standard for
standard. Thank
economic
you, Chris.
prosperity.
Oh, I have spoken to Paul Hurd, but I think our most recent conversations had to do with redrawing lines on congressional maps. I haven't spoken to him about this special session.
I think you should very much talk to him soon because he has some fantastic ideas, and he's worked on, I think, a package of 10 bills he wants to bring. So there may be something there
I'll look into it.
that you can put into your binder. I had one other thing I wanted to mention. Oh, if you are looking for an idea for a bill to bring sometime soon, I would love to see a bill brought that says that the state is not allowed to pay any non-governmental organizations. Why are we paying non-governmental organizations? By definition, it's not government. So therefore, it's out of your purview. That would save us a lot of money.
We're discussing that amongst colleagues. We know that generally when the state pays an NGO for something, it's to do something that the state was going to do anyway, and it appears at the time that the NGO can do it cheaper. And so that's how we got here. Now, to reverse that, we would have to do that. We'd have to write some limiting legislation that would say that you can only fund an NGO under certain circumstances, or just you can never fund an NGO. But then never funding an NGO would mean that the state is responsible to do whatever it was they were expecting the NGO to do. And if the state ends up doing that at a greater expense, then have we really helped? For example, when the Morganza to the Gulf levee system was proposed, and it took 22 years for the Corps of Engineers to study it before we could go to Congress and ask for any help funding it, Congress initially said, that study's too old, you're going to have to start again. And so that's how Terrebonne and Lafourche ended up voting a tax on ourselves, because we figured out that the feds are not going to help. If we're going to get any help at all, we need to do it ourselves. Well, after the fact, what we realized was if the feds had funded it from the beginning, we would probably still be sitting here today flooding, because the higher the level of government, the more slowly it moves and the more it costs. We have been able to do all of the Morganza to the Gulf projects so far at a fraction of what it would cost if the federal government had done this for us, or even helped very much along the way. That to say that sometimes there are ways to fund things that are necessary at a better rate. And I believe that in many cases, not all, but in many cases, NGOs have been able to provide a particular service for a lot cheaper than what the government could have provided it. Now, going back to our earlier conversation, in many cases also, I would bet that a lot of those services are things that the government probably isn't supposed to be providing anyway. When we look at founding scripture, so that's a whole other conversation. But before we run out of time, I want to mention one more thing. My colleagues and I are working on something called a GGL. Get to know the acronym. It's called Government Growth Limit. And one of the things that we are expecting, and the governor has already said that he is okay with, he agrees with, is putting in place a government growth limit. It's a little like an expenditure limit, but better. And right now, the actual bill for that is still being drafted, but maybe at our next visit, I can give you the details of how that's going to work, because we're still talking about what the particulars need to be in setting a formula for a government growth limit. What we're trying to do is rein in the rate of growth of government. And I believe that the bill is going to turn out very well, that probably won't limit government as severely as you and I would like to, but we have to start somewhere, because if we don't, it just keeps growing out of control like a bad weed.
Amazing. Well, that's music to my ears, Beryl.
Good.
Is that something, Beryl, that would be? That's not something that would be covered or included in this session, right? Or would it?
Yes.
Oh, it is. Well, that's something that I would definitely like to look at more closely. Anything that limits the rate at which government grows is something that is, at least on its face, very attractive to us.
I forget what the item number is, but if you look up the expenditure limit in the call, that's the item where this bill would fit.
We are so honored to be affiliate partners for General Michael Flynn's movie, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. Support General Flynn and the State of Freedom by shopping the Flynn Movie Store directly from the button on our homepage at freedomstate.us or through our affiliate link, flynnmovie.com/TSOF podcast. On that site, you can purchase the DVD, which comes with a streaming link. You can pick up Flynn Movie merchandise and get his complete 5GW book series.
Yeah. Well, Beryl, let me ask you this last question here. Let's say we get into the session here and, legislators may agree with some of what Governor Landry wants to do. They may disagree with other items. They may think that, no, this is not good for the Louisiana taxpayer, and our responsibility is to be good stewards of their money. Does the legislature, in your view, have the will to oppose Governor Landry when necessary, or can we expect a session in which a majority of legislators essentially rubber stamp what he wants? Because that's something that Louisiana citizens, I think, reasonably expect from our legislature, to stand up to a governor who obviously has tremendous executive power, more so in Louisiana than in many other states. What is your gut feeling on whether or not the legislature will have the will to oppose him when necessary?
A whole lot of cordial debate, because in our talks with the governor so far, when there are components of his entire plan that we have hesitation or even objection to, he's been very flexible. His plan has already changed a bit since the original proposal that was handed to us in response to some of the concerns that we've expressed. And so I'm glad to see that he's willing to be flexible. And I'm not sure exactly what's going to finally pan out when it comes down to the actual vote on the actual bills. So I think it'll just be an interesting session, and I'm looking forward to the conversations.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be vigorous and robust. There's no question about that. And many people in the state right now, Beryl, really don't know what to expect. They really haven't formed an opinion 100% on whether it's good or bad, or which parts are good and which parts are bad. So, well, I can tell you this: having people like you and others there certainly helps us to sleep better at night, knowing that your fundamental loyalty is to your constituents and to Louisiana citizens, as it has always been.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And
sir.
to the Constitution.
Thank you. We could get a whole lot more done if we had a whole lot more agreement, but it is what it is, and we do the best we can. One of the challenges has been with this reform package, when we've urged the governor and pushed for government cuts instead of extra taxing, and the governor's told us, well, be my guest, dig in, show me where you want to cut. The way that a lot of us feel is this: I'm a part-time legislator. I've got a life, I've got a day job, I've got a business, and what have you. There are people within the departments who are the budget experts in every department. They have bookkeeping and CPA experience. Many of them have done their department or agency's budget for years. It's a little aggravating as a legislator to be told, go and find whatever cuts you want to make. I would prefer that the people who deal with the budget in each agency get honest about real, they're calling them efficiencies. How can your department be more efficient? Where is the excess that you could trim? When the departments are being asked to present to appropriations, how would your department function on 1% less, 3% less, or even 5% less than you got last year? Departments come before us, like the Department of Health did at the end of September, and tell us that the only thing that we can figure out to do is to cut certain disability services.
Come on.
Corporations push back.
That's so full of garbage.
Exactly. So I've started taking names of people who work within the Department of Health who, how do we say that? Know where all the bodies are buried. The people who are there day to day and who know where there's lack and where there's excess and what could be reduced. For example, if you're an employee, you know which other employees go above and beyond and which ones don't even carry their own weight. Some of those maybe should be let go, for example.
Imagine that. Imagine that.
Wouldn't that be great? So I am irritated that someone would expect me as a part-time legislator to go and dig into all the agency budgets to find this, when we have people who are being paid by our tax dollars who know how to do it and who aren't doing it. But what I have told the governor and his staff is, look, I shouldn't have to do this, but I believe it needs to be done. I believe my people elected me to take care of certain things. And if I'm the one that's going to have to dig into a department and find where we can cut back without cutting services to some of our least able people, then I'll do it. It's going to take some time, but I'll do it. It needs to be done. So I'm happy to. And I'm picking on the Department of Health because they literally did just that. They came before us in August and said, we're just going to have to reduce the amount that we spend on the disabled population services. It's like,
and what does that tell you about their overall inclination to cut spending or to tighten their belt? They're going to come in and tell you that the only thing that we can do to cut spending is to reduce services for the disabled. Not only, I mean, that is, and of course, most people have great sympathy for services for the disabled. People don't want to cut services that are necessary for the disabled. So in certain ways, that's a little disingenuous for the LDH to come in there and lead with that. Basically, this is the end of the discussion. No more discussion about cutting spending. No more discussion about being fiscally responsible unless you want to hurt the disabled.
Well,
so leave it alone.
And I think adding to that they're going to be very, very disappointed or look, it's not going to be a pretty day for them whenever things get cut that they don't get to pick, right? So they'll rue the day. If you're going line by line in their budget, they will rue the day. So cheers to that.
There are people who've already started and they're a bit ahead of me, and I'm happy to work with them and glean from them. And that's like Representative Buckala. In that particular hearing of appropriations, near the end of the meeting, we were just so fed up with what we were being told that he went down a list of what he had already found that they could consider. And he basically read out the list and said, these are all things you could do before you ever try and cut $1 from services for these people who need it the most. And so I'm very proud of him for having dug, and that's only with a preliminary review. Think of what we might be able to find if we actually got to spend plenty of time with people who can show us the whole budget. But in that hearing, it was just so reminiscent of a lot of what we heard under the last administration. I was literally waiting for them to also say, we're going to kick grandma out of the nursing home, and somebody was going to say, we're not going to have LSU football. That's where it was headed.
That's what he did. That's what Edwards did. Yeah.
I want to say, too, that department and agency heads, the new commissioners, secretaries, they have been great. With the new administration, we have new headship at the Department of Health and many other departments. And I truly believe, and I didn't ask him, I truly believe that the administration was embarrassed sitting at the table, hearing their staff say, this is all we can do. We'd like to have been a fly on the wall to hear the conversations when they all got back to the office. So I think that they were simply caught off guard. They're the new heads of these departments, and we usually have these budget review hearings in March before an April session. So this is months ahead of time. And so they probably just turned to their staff and said, hey, we need a report, we need it passed. And the staff, the people in middle management, are people who by and large had served under the last administration. And so they just did what they have always been expected to do. So I'm hoping that there have been many changes already since August within the department, because if they come back in March and we have the same conversation again, I don't know. This time I don't think I'll walk out of the room. I might end up saying things that get me in trouble in the press.
Well, I'll tell you, Representative Amedee, that if some of these things that are being proposed on the federal level with the dramatic cutting of bureaucracy, duplicative services, streamlining of government, I think perhaps that could create an incentive, could certainly give some of our state leaders the courage to do what needs to be done on the state level as well.
Right.
But you are an outstanding legislator and a real patriot, and always a pleasure to have you with us. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We'll be talking to you soon.
Okay, looking forward to it.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit LACAG.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.